This is the Seahawkers Podcast, episode 401. I'm Brandon Schultz of the Military Seahawkers, and joining me, my good buddy and Montana Seahawker, Adam Emmert.
What up, buddy? What a great podcast today. We could talk about the Geno contract. We get to know a little more details. We get to talk about some releases that happen. We get to talk about the draft. We get to talk about this amazing, super fun sliding doors off season that we've got going on here. I'm fired up, bud.
Well, we talked about the Geno Smith signing in our last live stream. Once that news came down, at the time, we only had some minor contract details. You know, the initial ones that make it sound like it's a really, really big deal of a contract in terms of monetary value, because that's what the agents are putting out. And then you find out a little bit later of what the actual numbers are and how it breaks down. And then you say, oh, see, it turns out that this is a relatively team-friendly deal. And even on the live stream that we did, we talked about ways that it could break down to be team-friendly. And I think we came out pretty close.
Heck yeah. I think it worked out just right. I love the contract. I think John Schneider hit a home run right here. This is something that doesn't happen in today's NFL. We actually ended up with a middle-class contract for a quarterback. Like, that never happens, or hasn't in the last 5-10 years, right? You either get paid $50 million a year or $3 million a year. And this is perfect. And it also allows Geno to make more if he performs at the same level and or higher than he did last year. Gives the team some protection. The cap hit this year, not so bad. They've already made up for that with one release. I think this is beyond a home run. This gives them all the flexibility. They're not locked into QB at 5 if they don't want to be. I love it.
Yeah, and there's some big news that happened this week, too, in terms of shakeup at the top of the draft board that has a big potential to impact what the Seahawks are able to do in the draft. But let's talk about the contract for Geno Smith, because 2023, we have the numbers broken out. Base salary for 2023, $1.2 million. He gets a signing bonus of $27 million, which breaks out to about $9 million per year over 3 seasons. So that's how the player gets a bunch of money up front, but then the team with a 3-year contract, it spreads that out over the course of the 3 years. That allows them to keep the base salary low for the first year. And one of the things that was talked about with that initial contract number was that it was $52 million in the first year. It was the first calendar year. And so when you break that out to the calendar year, you're talking about the signing bonus that he gets in the first year, the base salary that he gets for this next year, and then the bonuses that kick in next offseason, which there's a $10 million roster bonus that must kick in, shortly within the calendar year that he gets to. So that's how we're able to get to that number. And even the cap numbers are it's like 25 million-ish over the next 3 years. And then there's incentives on top of that, but you're talking about incentives of him being a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. And so if you're paying him an extra 10 million because he's hitting numbers similar to what we saw from him this past season in 2022, okay, yeah, that'd be great if we pay a quarterback an extra 10 million because he's producing at the top 10 level, which most top 10 quarterbacks are making salaries in the 40 millions.
Absolutely. It's so win-win all the way around. And give Geno a lot of credit. He really did come to the table with his agent. You heard John talk about his agent many times and have realistic ideas and thoughts about how they could get this done, to be open-minded and flexible in the way that the contract is structured. You could tell this is exactly where Geno wanted to be. And one of the comments from John, I think it was in the presser when they reintroduced Geno, right. That was kind of funny, was that he was just so thankful that Geno and the agent were able to talk through the idea of a contract that maybe wasn't fully guaranteed or lesser than this, or had some incentive-based things and that sort of thing for the team to want to win. And they had this in their mind from the exit interview, it sounds like, is that was the big part of what I got out of John's comment, was like, yeah, leaving there, Yeah, I mean, I'm super confident. Not for sure, but super confident we're going to get this done. And this is what you hope to see. I don't know how many times as fans of different franchises, your quarterback comes up for a deal and you're like, if he could just Tom Brady us a little bit, if he could just, leave a little on the table to make sure that he has success and make all that extra money off the field and all that stuff, we'd be in good shape. And it never happens. And yet it did. It did with Geno. And I think that goes to his character.
Now we just need Geno to perform at the Tom Brady level and win us a Super Bowl, and we'll be fine. But there is a trajectory aspect to this, and I think it's something that Geno's banking on. Hopefully, I expect the Seahawks are banking on it too. I know that it was one of the things that we talked about was that idea that maybe Geno could be worse in 2023 because there's going to be tape out on him. But he did address the counterpoint to that argument.
Honestly, it's really my first time, being in any offensive system, even from high school, for more than 2 years. And so it's going to be new for me to see what that's like. But I'm excited about it, and having a year of football, of playing and having tape to learn from and being able to learn from my own past mistakes, I think it'll make me better in the long run.
And so going back to that introduction or reintroduction of Geno, it's kind of cool that this kicks off this offseason with him being the guy going into next year.
I think that will be helpful. The idea that he's not going to be competing in the way that he was this last year. They did talk a bit in the presser about what if they brought in a quarterback at some point, what would that look like? And, Geno said absolutely every one of the right things perfectly. Whether he means them or not is another thing.
I love to compete, so I compete with anybody. But I'm also going to, help him out as much as I can, the same as, we did with Drew. And our QB room is so tight-knit, and we're all so connected that we act as one. And so whether it's a young guy or someone else, I'm going to help that player, just like any other player on our team, be the best that he can be, because that's my job as a leader, and that's who I am at heart. I'm never going to withhold information. I'm always going to try and help guys get better. And so that's what I want to do, and if that happens, then that's the guy I'll be.
Why do you keep hinting at Geno saying things that he doesn't necessarily believe?
Is he a franchise quarterback in front of a podium?
Yeah, I suppose.
Okay, well, yeah, because the guys that do say what they think, the guys that do just let it rip, they get absolutely ripped, whether you're Aaron Rodgers or Kyler Murray or whoever it is, right?
Sure.
Yeah, speak your mind and you get ripped. Speaking cliches and you get ripped.
Well, he had the opportunity to speak his mind with one of the other questions that they asked. A reporter asked Geno, what does the team need to be more successful in 2023?
Me? I was about to say that's a question for these guys. I'm the player here, so I got to focus on the guys that we do have and just continue to build those guys up and continue to work as hard as we can to be a great team. And I trust these guys to make those decisions.
Appreciate it.
The two things from that clip that crack me up: John Schneider laughing like a hyena, like through the entire answer. And then Pete Carroll coming in at the end. I did have to boost it a little bit because he says quietly to Geno, appreciate it, at the very end of the answer.
Yeah, it was great. The third thing I loved about that was as the question's being asked and the three of them realize that it's being directed at Geno, both Pete and John kind of just look at each other across the table like, oh boy, what's going to happen here? And they both start cracking up. And then, Geno opens his mouth and of course says the right thing yet again, because he has handled that part of the job with extreme professionalism, and you expect nothing less. And you get that with a mid-tier contract. I just think his leadership, being able to be in the system again, not having to compete with the rookie in a way that he did with Drew Lock, right? Like there's going to be competition if they bring in a dude and say the third or something, but he's more or less the guy, barring injury.
So you didn't expect him to say, well, I'm kind of tired of getting hit after this season, or we could really use some other superstars on this team. You didn't expect either of those answers?
And, he doesn't want to be traded, but if he were to be traded, it'd be one of these four teams. No, I did not expect him to say any of that nonsense. I think he actually appreciates being in one of the best ran organizations of all of football.
Well, we are hoping that they can make it an even better team going into 2023. And one way to do that kicks off this week with free agency starting on Monday. Yes, the official start of free agency starts on Monday. Don't let people tell you that it starts on Wednesday. players can start talking to teams on Monday. They're probably even doing it before Monday. So we start to, I know, like, can you believe it? But you're going to start hearing details about deals on Monday. I don't know how many we're going to hear about the Seahawks, just because I don't expect them to be super active in this first round of free agency. But through this week, there are some areas where they can address some weaknesses. A couple places that they're going to need to address weaknesses were based off of a couple of transactions from this past week. Center Austin Blythe retires, and Gabe Jackson, the right guard, released by the Seahawks. So they were able to sign Phil Haynes before that news came out. I see him as competing for those spots. I don't think he's a guy that you just pencil in as one of those starters, but it's an area now to address now that those two moves have been made.
Yeah, followed by a third one that is not yet official, but the tea leaves are pointing the direction, and that is Shelby Harris being released. He had put out a Twitter or whatever it is that people do. And
yeah, I think it originally happened on Instagram, which kind of matters, and then was discussed on Twitter. Right. So him essentially hinting that he doesn't have control of where he's going to be this upcoming season.
Right. And so you see that the team is taking the direction that it needs to take here, and they're taking it seriously. I mean, we all have bitched and moaned about interior line play, whether that's offensive or defensive. And I have a feeling maybe Blythe retired because they were like, yeah, we're probably going to cut you, just so you know. And he's like, well, okay, screw it. I'll just retire then and call it good. And then Gabe Jackson, that makes a lot of sense. Splitting time with another player with a $12 million cap hit. I don't think so. You're not worth it at that point. And then Shelby Harris, they saved somewhere around $9 million in the cap this year, if that indeed is what happens here. But it does kind of paint a clearer picture as to where the Seahawks are going to have to focus in free agency in the draft.
And with Harris, it could be that they're telling him that you're going to be released unless you want to restructure. His agent wouldn't be so keen on restructuring. The agent may know if there's other better opportunities out there. And so that could be what leads to him ultimately being released. But hey, maybe it works out. They're able to restructure. He comes back. That would be fine. He was the top rated defensive interior player for the Seahawks last year. According, if you look at the PFF numbers, he was in the top 20, which is pretty decent. Not like Austin Blythe, who is ranked number 33 by PFF in 2022, which is dead nuts average, Adam, if you consider all of the backup centers in the NFL.
Well, a couple things. I don't know how many times we have talked about it on the show, and PFF and its lineman grades, you know, whether it's offensive or defensive lineman. I think it's an incredibly hard position to judge with any sort of objectivity. There's a lot of subjectivity to it. So 30, what was it? 33?
33. Yeah.
Yeah. That's too low.
You know how many starting centers there are, right?
32.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's too low. That doesn't line up with the eye test. However, the Seahawks are taking it seriously. They're like, look, average line play isn't going to get it done. We got to do more. We have to do more to run the ball, and we have to do more to stop the run. And so then it kind of comes down to, of all the different areas on the team that need to be improved, whether that's pass rush, whether that's running the football yourself, whether that's stopping the run on defense, what other areas would you identify if you were going through? Those are kind of the big three for me.
The other area where there's potential for improvement is just having another offensive weapon, right?
Sure. Yeah, no, that could definitely be in there. Increasing the depth in the offensive passing game and in the backfield. I could see that as well. So then you look at all those and then you prioritize them. It's like, okay, well, what's the one that's going to make the biggest difference? What could take you from 9-8 and increase that to a 12-win season, right? A 3-win jump. Which one of those is going to be the thing that attributes the most to being able to do that? And to me, it's stop the run. That right there, to me, would have been a 3-game difference. You stop the run and you don't get beat by the Panthers. You stop the run and you don't get beat by the Raiders. You stop the run, you don't get beat by the Saints and Taysom Hill running around everywhere.
Yeah, and the thing is, with that goal of stopping the run, that's not something that's going to cost a lot in free agency. Finding dudes who can stop the run aren't the premier tier guys that you pay. You pay guys who can rush the passer, and that's what you're looking for. Those are the guys that get paid. So finding guys who can just improve the team's ability to stop the run, that's why I don't think that they're going to be super active in the first week of free agency.
Oh, I think that's a great assessment. And then you pair that with John Schneider's past when it comes to addressing free agency. He rarely makes a big day one splash and that sort of thing. So with that said, Brandon, as you're looking at free agency coming up here, is there anybody on the defensive side of the ball that you're like, yeah, he's him. That's a guy that I want. And it doesn't necessarily mean they're a star, but you like their game for about the money that you think you could get him for and how that fits with the Seahawks.
Yeah, for the defense, actually the guy that identified who I want the most is on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, a guy who's intriguing, and I don't know if he's going to be too much considering his age. He played for the Seahawks, Bobby Wagner. No, I won't go Bobby. You know what? Another linebacker who I'm kind of interested in would be Eric Kendricks from the Vikings.
Really?
I don't think he'd be super expensive. I think he's a guy who has kind of fallen off over the last.
He's old.
He's 31. He's not super old for a linebacker.
Yeah, I guess.
I don't know if I'm going with a little bit younger guy, because the most intriguing linebacker free agent would be Tremaine Edmonds out of Buffalo.
Right.
But the kind of contract that you're talking about like a $15 million a year plus contract because he is young. He's going to get a long-term deal. I don't really want to go there necessarily. At linebacker, TJ Edwards from the Eagles would be one of the higher profile linebackers. Leighton Vander Esch, maybe. He doesn't seem like he'd be super expensive coming from the Cowboys. Levante David, I guess, would be another one of the guys that I think would be kind of on the top of the second tier in terms of free agents.
Yeah, I think he could be in that first tier of free agents when it comes to linebackers too, just based on reputation. He's a great off-ball linebacker, has been throughout his career, has some injury histories.
And he's older. He's 33.
Yeah. And so I kind of look at that and I'm like, Edmonds, like, I love Edmonds, but I don't want to pay a linebacker that kind of money. I like Levante David fine. I think he would come in and be a great fit. But again, I don't want to pay that kind of money. Really, as I was looking for through it, I kept coming back to some of the players that are on the Charger or were on the Chargers roster following the Nwosu experiment, which went really, really well for the Seahawks. And a Chargers defense that has a ton of talent on it. I really like Drew Tranquil. I like him a lot. I remember looking at the way that he plays and seeing him in the Seahawks game, as well as other games, and a very instinctual player, stops the run really well, and is a little better in pass protection or pass coverage than I think that people give him credit for. The other guy would be Kyle Van Noy is going to be a free agent this year, and a guy who was injured the majority of the year. It took a while to kind of get back and get right, but by the end of the year was lighting it up. He had a sack in like his last 4 games. Both guys would come dirt cheap. And I think they're wonderful depth players that you could pair with maybe some more explosive players from the draft.
You could even maybe talk me into the idea of signing Cody Barton, because I don't think that he's going to be really expensive either. He has that flexibility to where he could play middle linebacker. He could play his traditional position, just because not having an idea of where Jordan Brooks is going to be in terms of his injury recovery. If it's like a $2 to $3 million contract, you could talk me into it.
That's about 1.5 million too much. I just watching him play last year was one of the more frustrating things that I watched throughout the season. How many times was he just like running into a pile for like no reason, or going the wrong way for no reason, or not getting depth on his pass coverage for like no reason? How many balls hit him right in the hand and he just dropped it? It happened all the time. And I am totally and completely over Cody Barton.
I don't know. Maybe as the off season has gone on, or I don't even know if it's necessarily, because I remember how bad Barton was in many of those games, but I think it's just because that I think that the team's going to re-sign him, that I'm preparing myself to be okay with it. It's kind of like a defense mechanism for myself because Blythe's gone. They'll pick one guy that I really don't want to be back to go ahead and bring back.
Well, that would be as good a candidate as any, right? For sure. At least for me, that'd probably be my number one, because I just think you can get almost anybody to do Cody Barton things. And there's a number of dudes that can do better Cody Barton things.
You could go get Alex Singleton, who I think it was his first year with any significant time with the Broncos this past season. He was a guy who was, I think, a practice squatter for the Seahawks for a while and kind of had a breakout-ish year. Like, he was okay for the Broncos this year.
Right. There's a boatload of those guys. I would expect them to probably spend their money at linebacker as opposed to the defensive front, only because I think they're going to try to address that in the draft. That's my guess. I mean, it's probably going to be a mix of some things, of course. But really, I mean, who's the only D tackle on the roster now? Is there anybody? Are they D tackle list?
Well, Al Woods is still.
Miles Adams.
Yeah. And I think Brian Monet still on the roster. What do you think of, in terms of mid-tier guys that are out there? I don't know. Zach Allen is kind of in that mid-tier for Arizona. He had a better year last year than his previous years. It was a name that kind of jumped out at me a little bit. David Onyemata out of New Orleans. He's on the older side though. Zach Allen's only 25. So that's one of the reasons why he jumped out at me, because like a discount Daron Payne, who got franchise tagged by Washington.
Yeah. He feels a little Kerry Hyder-ish to me.
Yeah.
Where had a good season and gets overpaid, and you bring him in and you realize, oh, he is just a guy in terms of Allen. Dude from the Saints, fine. And you're going to need a few of those, right? You're going to need some guys that can just plug up the middle a little bit and help stop the run. But it'll be interesting to see, do they go after somebody like Payne, or do they just focus at the draft, or do they wait till after the draft to try to focus on some of these things? I don't know.
With the idea that you have to pay Payne and give up draft picks, that just seems out to me. They've always been able to find guys who are kind of okay-ish for the defensive interior. And yes, it was a weakness last year. And part of it, I'll chalk up part of it to the transition of going from a 4-3 to a 3-4, I suppose. And maybe they can work that out here in this offseason. There's reasons to think that it could get better next year. I didn't expect the defense to be that bad this past year anyway. It was surprising to me that offense was the strength considering everything that happened last offseason. So the funny thing is that the places that I'd prefer for them to focus in free agency then is on the offensive side of the ball. But part of that is because I want to use all those draft picks primarily on defense.
And there's going to be a lot of great players that are available. There seems to be an inkling that the D tackle, was he from Georgia? Is it Carter? Is that the one?
Right.
I'm not a draft Nick. I don't know all this stuff. Make fun of me all you want in the comments. Don't really care. Apparently he's awesome. Apparently he's had some race, gotten a car accident sort of thing with a buddy. I don't know. But long story short, some people died and he could be in some heat for that. I don't know. But
you definitely don't know, because in terms of the details, you're kind of in the neighborhood. But
yeah, I'm not saying any of that's like close to accurate. I just know that he's real good. There's some problems swirling around. Maybe that's where they would focus first before spending free agent dollars on the interior. And also too, like I said, I think they'll spend it more on linebacker, which means, do they spend that money on, say, I don't know, a certain Bobby Wagner who's resurfaced after, I don't know, I guess he was abducted by aliens last year and left the planet or something. I didn't really notice where he went.
There was a team that they reversed his number to 45. They flipped the W to an M. I don't remember what team that was, just because I've blanked that part of my memory. But yeah, Bobby Wagner out and available. And in terms of guys who I'd like to see back with Seattle, well, there's 3 guys who are on defense who are going to be available now because the Chiefs released Frank Clark. The Jacksonville Jaguars released Shaquille Griffin, and Bobby Wagner out from purgatory. Those 3 guys all have some appeal because they're all at positions where the team could improve.
For sure. So if you were to have your former Seahawks wish list, what order do you put that in?
Sentimentally, I put Bobby Wagner at the top because I always think that franchise players should have an opportunity to kind of go out how they would like to go out. If he's not turned off by the idea of the team allowing him to leave last year, he'd be okay with coming back, and it's not going to cost a ton to bring him back. Yeah, I'd want Bobby Wagner back. Number 2 on the list, Shaquille Griffin, just because I think having him back in his normal position, I think it would be enough of an upgrade over Mike Jackson that has some appeal. Frank Clark, he has the ability to rush the passer. Is it going to improve the Seahawks enough? I see that more of as a cost benefit type situation, and I don't think of what he's going to cost would improve the Seahawks enough.
Yeah, I'm right with you. I'd flip-flop Shaq and Bobby. I'm more interested in having Shaq back, and that's just more. He had a great season the first year that he was in Jacksonville, got hurt last year. He's cleared his medical supposedly this year after his back injury. That's a guy I think that you can end up bringing back that knows the system, played well here, is still young, and you'll probably get him for a mid-tier price for a starting corner. And I think he's better than Mike Jackson for sure. And if you've got him, you bring, is Mike Jackson a restricted free agent, I think? Or maybe
something like that.
Yeah. Bring him back even if you can. And then some people are like, well, yeah, but then there's Trey Brown, right? It's like, well, okay, yeah, there's also Trey Brown. But the problem with that is that his injury history has been really rough. So I would be more excited to bring Shaq back. As far as bringing Bobby back, you saw the interview with John Schneider with Seattle Sports Radio talking and being like, oh, we've had awesome discussions and this, that, and the other thing. And a lot of people reading a lot into that. I can break it down for you real quick. The discussion was, hey, would you be interested in coming back? Bobby's like, yeah, for sure. Okay, well, we're looking at about this number, and it's probably a pretty low one. And if you want to, we could use you, but this is about all we can afford because of where we're at. Bobby's like, yeah, I'd maybe like to see what else is out there. You bet, man. Why don't you go out there and see if there's a team that has a chance to win a chip that's going to pay you a bunch of money. And if that can come to fruition for you, Godspeed, right? If those opportunities aren't out there and you'd like to come home at about this rate, we'd love to have you. And I think Bobby was like, yeah, let me see. And if it doesn't work out, sure, let's give it a go. I don't think it was, hey, man, we want you back. Let's get a big deal done, the whole nine. I mean, yeah, that's how some people.
What do you think that number is?
I don't know. What's a mid-tier middle linebacker these days? About $7 million a year? That would be a rough guess.
And I think that would maybe even be on the high side for what Seattle would be thinking.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to get at, is I think it's going to be less than that. I think it'd probably be something in like the 2-year, $8 million range. However they split all that up, keep the cap hit low and
keep the cap hit low. And then maybe you can push some of that money in case Bobby does retire. And it's kind of, here's your going away parting gift into retirement. You kind of got paid for 2 years for only playing one.
Exactly. And I think he'd be a nice fit until Brooks gets healthy. He could help mentor whoever else they bring in as terms of a young linebacker. And then last would be Frank Clark for me. You painted it very well. I don't see the value in terms of what he's going to cost and what he can bring, as opposed to, say, somebody like Boye Mafe.
If you just go and look at Chiefs comments about Frank Clark during the regular season over the last 2 years, they weren't all that happy about the trade. And a big part of that is because he just didn't produce a ton during the regular season. And then I know a lot of us, we watched Chiefs football in the postseason. We're like, oh my gosh, Frank Clark's still awesome. Yeah, it's because playoff Frank Clark is pretty awesome.
Yeah. Playoff Frank Clark is much like playoff Rondo in the NBA. If you remember back a few years, like just be kind of a not a loafer, but just kind of not super productive in the regular season. And then come the playoff. And then all of a sudden you're like, holy cow, there's the dude from 5 years ago that was amazing.
Right.
Just likes the big lights. I don't know that that's worth it for this iteration of this team. And so, yeah, I would definitely like to see Shaq back. I think that would be a nice move. What are they going to have now? Functional cap space after this Geno thing and Shelby Harris? What, something like 20-ish million?
It's in the high 20s, I think. If they release Harris, yeah, I think it's high 20s, and that's even considering the amount that they have to pay their draft picks. So, and with the way the cap works, a lot of times when guys are signed, it's you're pushing some of that salary cap bonus into later years. So I feel like as long as you're not going for the biggest names of names in those first days of free agency, you can get a lot of value out of $25 to $30 million in cap space.
Oh, for sure.
Especially when you're talking about, again, the idea is improving to average-ish, improving in the area of stopping the run, which they were so poor at last year, and the idea of improving on the interior of the offensive line. It's the exterior. It's the tackle spots that are expensive when you're talking about free agency. The interior guys, unless it's the top tier guys, they generally aren't super expensive. And the one guy that I'm looking at for the interior is a guy who could play both the guard and center spot. He's probably on some of the lists as one of the top guards coming off of the Eagles team, but a guy who is from the Pacific Northwest. So I think it's a player who you could get back here. And that's Isaac Samalu, who played right guard for the Eagles. And he came out of the draft as a guy who was projected at center, but because obviously with Kelsey being in Philly, he didn't have a chance to play there. So he played right guard. He was good this last year. And I like the idea of having flexibility in case you decide to draft a guard or draft a center. You have a guy who can play both spots.
Yeah, a couple things on that. I mean, you talked about those guys don't cost much out on the open market. They also don't cost nearly as much in draft capital, right? So you can find those guys a little further back in the draft. Say if, I don't know, you were to do something crazy like trade back. I'm not sure that the Seahawks ever really do that, but
no, never.
Thought. Yeah. So they are available, and you're right. So it's totally doable to get better at those spots. The kid from the Eagles, like, yeah, sure, sign me up. That was a great offensive line. If he's a major contributor to that, perfect. I'll take him. One of the highest rated centers out there in free agency, Brandon. I think it's PFF that ranks him the highest. So you take that with what you will.
Yeah.
Any interest in, because we forgot to put him in our former Seahawks hierarchy. Ethan Posick, are you ready? Ready to bring back Posick?
I'd be okay with it.
No,
if the price was right, but I mean, there's other dudes at center too. There's Connor McGovern from the Jets. There's Garrett Bradbury from the Vikings. Bradbury's probably the name that jumps out at me the most, although he's not the greatest in pass protection just because of his size. Bradley Bozeman, pairing Bradley Bozeman with Billy Bozeman. I mean, how does that not make sense?
That's a great point. All the Bozemans, let's get them together. We need that. No, Bozeman's a hell of a player. I would take that. McGlinchey's available as a guard. Yeah, it's going to be interesting because they just went the veteran route with Gabe Jackson, right? And you got a year or two, and it's about all you can really expect. Is that something they want to continue at, or do they want to start grabbing a bunch of young guys to pair with the young tackles, and then all of a sudden now you have a very strong position group that you're good to go for the next 5 years?
And I'm with you. I don't think that they would even be fishing for him to come back at this point. Like, he was here.
I'm good.
And they let him go.
No, I'm more than good on that. No, thanks. There's a couple dudes in the draft, I'm sure, at the center position that could come in and do the job. There's going to be guards. There's no doubt about it.
One guard who I would almost assuredly expect to be on the Seahawks radar is David Edwards, who didn't play a lot this last year for the Rams, but he had a good season in 2021. He was one of the top 30 ranked guards. And I just think with that Shane Waldron connection and that he's coming off of an off year, that he's not going to be super expensive, that he could be a guy I could see coming to Seattle.
Sure. Yeah, I could see it. I think there's probably other guys out there that you can get there a little more productive and probably spend less.
Another guy on my radar. I don't know if you had a ton of offensive linemen on your radar, but
no.
Will Hernandez is out there. He was one of those players that identified as a fit for the Seahawks. Talking to Rob Staten a few off seasons ago, he played for the Cardinals. He's going to be a free agent this offseason. Another guy, Andre Dillard, who was from Washington State, went to the Eagles. He played primarily, not a ton at the tackle spots, but this last year played more as a utility offensive lineman, filling in just for a few snaps here and there. And he's a guy that I could see, maybe he'd be up for coming back to Washington. He was an athletic guy, so kind of fits in with that type of player that the Seahawks seem to be looking for on the offensive line now.
You bet.
Any other spots that you're intrigued by?
I think wide receiver 3 would be a spot that I'm intrigued by.
I would be more intrigued if there were guys who were, there's one guy who I'm really interested in, just browsing the list of names, and has that Shane Waldron connection. How about Robert Woods?
I'm into it. I've really liked Robert Woods for a long time. He's one of the few Rams that I didn't just make fun of openly at all times, because I think he's a very good player. I think the other guy that kind of pops off the screen to me as a guy that, as a wide receiver 3, I think would be super dangerous, and that's Adam Thielen.
I'd be okay with Thielen. I kind of wonder how much he has left in the tank if Minnesota's getting rid of him. But the reason why I'm okay with him is just because I don't want to go that much higher into the top 100 list. Guys like Jacoby Myers or Juju Smith-Schuster and Odell Beckham and Michael Thomas and DJ Chark even. You're talking about guys who are going to get $10+ million a year because there are so few free agent wide receivers. We saw it last year even. It ended up being an okay move, but Christian Kirk going to the Jaguars and getting an $18 million deal, he at least produced, but we all looked at that last year and we're like, Christian Kirk getting 18 mil from the Jaguars. We're going to see that this offseason with Jacoby Myers getting some crazy contract.
Yeah, the wide receiver market is totally broken. So I would definitely be looking to fill that position as much as possible through the draft at this point, because the value to performance ratio, you can't, I don't care who you are. Even if you're D-Hop, it's hard to make up for the overpay that the market now has built into it. So I don't think wide receiver is going to be a big free agency place for the Seahawks. I imagine they address that through the draft, or heck, they do this sort of thing all the time with wide receiver 3. I could see them being like, we're good with Derek Young. It's happening.
Maybe Marquise Goodwin. I mean, he can come back. Eskridge, you kind of hope that he can come back and play, but you can't count on that as a franchise at this point.
But I'm into it. I thought Goodwin was a amazing addition to the team this year.
Pass rushers.
Oh, we don't have to get any new personnel on the pass rush sheet.
Okay.
I didn't know if you heard, but we hired some DN pass rush coach that I don't even know his name, but he's supposedly the guy who invented how to rush the passer and has worked with all the greats and is the best dude since Reggie White to ever think about pass rush.
Yeah, Brandon Jordan. Like, how do you forget that name? You have one of the most awesome first names a person could have, and then tie that with one of the greatest or the greatest basketball player of all time. That name is not one that you forget.
I did, and I just didn't commit that to memory. It might take me a full season to do it. Heck, maybe it'll only take me 3 games. I'll be eating my words. See, sometimes I throw these out here just so that it can go really well and I look like an idiot and the team does better. So that's what I'm hoping here. I'm hoping Mike Jordan is going to be Brandon Jordan is going to be the difference maker in getting consistent Darrell Taylor rushing, consistent Boye Mafe rushing, those sort of things. And I think they're probably going to add a guy too. I think Ngakoue is a free agent on the edge as well, from the Colts, who, while bouncing around from team to team, he seems to put up numbers every year.
The top names on the edge are Marcus Davenport of the Saints, some guy named Jadeveon Clowney, who we may have heard of as a former Seahawk. Again, Another one that we didn't talk about as former Seahawks coming back to the team. That seems unlikely, though. Charles Omenihu, who played for San Fran. I think we've done that experiment where we try and recycle San Francisco guys that just end up being productive in a system that benefits them. Arden Key, maybe. Samson Ebukam, again, another San Francisco guy. And you mentioned Unique. Leonard Floyd is a free agent. He was let go by the Rams. Brandon Graham, almost 35. Justin Houston's almost 35. So yeah, we're getting down to names. And did you bring up Kyle Van Noy? Yeah. So
I did.
Yeah.
I think for the dollar, he's going to be a good fit. And he's a bigger edge player who could help against the run. I like Van Noy. I always have. And I think he might be a nice fit.
Safety we're good at. We don't need to talk about that. Running back you can address through the draft. Maybe bring back Rashad Penny if the contract number's right.
Yeah, possibly. There's some guys in the draft.
Got to bring back Travis Homer, obviously. Maybe not so
That's
obviously.
What people say. Look, I know he has a role, and it's not like he's bad at it or anything. Like, he's actually pretty good at it. But spending money on that just doesn't make a lot of sense. If I'm going to spend money on another back, I want a back who can be a actual full-time running back if something happens to one of the other guys. Who was it that from the Panthers who's going to be a free? Deonta Foreman.
Oh.
Yeah, give me that guy. Just a big, powerful, bruising back. I mean, I watched him jelly it down our throat for an entire game. I'll take that, dude. Yeah.
Shoot, I might even take him over Penny.
I would. Yeah, for sure. Depending on the dollar amount, I guess. The thing about people talk about bringing Penny back as the backup running back, and I'm not a fan of it because I think what we've seen when he did have his stretch there where he could stay healthy and he was productive is that he's so much of a rhythm running back that it takes him a while to get the rhythm of the game and the defense that he's playing and all that before he starts breaking them. Yeah. If he's a guy that comes in and is just giving you 5 carries here, 15, 8 carries there, I don't think he can get into that rhythm, and I don't think he's going to be nearly as effective. And I think having a guy who is 3-4 yards, maybe a little bit more of a power back, cloud of dust kind of guy, but consistent in doing that, I would rather have that as RB2 with, Ken Walker being your home run hitter.
You know what? A guy who actually fits into what we're talking about here, a guy who could pass block, a guy who fills in now and again would be Samaje Perine for the Bengals. Yeah. And he's a free agent. Oh,
sweet. Okay. I'd be down for that. I've liked Perine since he came out of the draft. So yeah, he's one of those guys that is very versatile. He can do a little bit of everything. Yeah, sure. You betcha.
Probably not going to cost a whole lot either.
Well, it might. I mean, if the Bengals are having Joe Mixon problems, maybe Perine's price goes up a little bit.
Yeah, that could be true too. But there's also the draft coming up, and a lot of teams probably looking to address more of those positions through the draft rather than through free agency. And coming up next after the break, I want to get into the draft because there was a move. We teased it at the top of the show. There's a move that has the potential to impact the Seahawks in the draft. Let's get into it after the break. This past week, the Chicago Bears traded out of the number 1 overall pick in the 2023 draft. They traded it to the Carolina Panthers. General manager Scott Fitterer used to be one of the personnel folks in the Seahawks organization, now general managing his way into the top pick overall. And this impacts the Seahawks, Adam, because they're obviously moving up for quarterback. It was something that the Chicago Bears didn't really need. And that could mean a defensive player able to make it down to number 5, or maybe a different quarterback is able to be available in the top 5 if the Seahawks decide to go that way too. I feel like the Geno Smith signing makes that even more unlikely, but maybe there's somebody they're enamored with that ends up slipping to that 5 spot too. There's so many different ways that could go, but I see this as a benefit because it takes the Bears out of the equation for those first 5 picks.
surely does. And the Bears were looking at a lot of the positions that we'd be looking at, right? Because they have a ton of holes on defense, and getting them out of that top spot, getting Carolina in there, who clearly needs the quarterback. That's awesome. So 3 out of the 4 top teams ahead of us, they all need quarterbacks. That leaves Arizona at 3 that a team could potentially trade up with still to maybe get into the QB game. Or maybe they feel like, well, okay, if Arizona's going to draft a defensive player, maybe we could trade up with Seattle at 5 and get into the quarterback game. And Seattle would still have a chance at a defensive player that they really like a little further down the board. I think the guys that would be most likely for that, it looked like, would be possibly the Raiders or the Falcons. I think they're at like 7 and 8.
Right.
Both teams could use a long-term quarterback, and I could see maybe one of them either wanting to get up to 3 or 5 to ensure they get one of these top 4 or 5 guys, however it is that you like to parse it out.
That would be pretty wild if quarterbacks go in the first 4 spots.
Especially with as much free agent acquisitions, or as many free agents as there are out there at the quarterback position that can play a little bit. Whether that was Jimmy G or Carr or Geno, or go down the list, right?
Right.
Minshew.
Because you could see maybe the Texans getting a free agent quarterback, then that would open them up to drafting on the defensive side. The Colts, they could go out and get a free agent quarterback and draft defense. So the thing is if that happens, then the quarterbacks then slide back to the 5th spot, which makes it all the better for the Seahawks to, if the top 2 or 3 defenders are off the board by then the number 5 spot is appealing for teams to trade into and get a quarterback, and the Seahawks can end up with more draft picks because of it.
And I know that you watched Brett Coleman's little breakdown that he put out the other day and talking about the Super Bowl window for the Seahawks here in the next 2 years and some of the things he would do if he were the GM. And he made all the picks for this year's draft and did a little mock draft for Seattle. And that was cool. Don't get me wrong. I enjoyed the content, and I think Brett does a wonderful job, but he picked where the Seahawks have picks right now. And I was like, well, okay, so automatically this seems pretty much impossible.
Well, I don't know. I feel like Tyree Wilson's a player who has been talked about in the top 10, but not necessarily at that 5th pick spot. And that was the guy that he had pegged to Seattle with the 5th overall pick. I could see Seattle still being in the top 10 and being able to take maybe one of the top edge players, and Wilson might fall into that category. Although I feel like he's one of those guys that seems to be getting more hype now as we get closer to the draft, but there's only so many guys that can go in the top 10. So not everybody can be a top 10 player.
Yeah. 10. There's so 10. Many of them. Yeah. 10 of them, but it's almost impossible to think that the Seahawks don't trade down with one of their first round picks.
Oh, sure.
If you were a betting man, Brandon, 5 or 20, which one do you think that they trade back from?
So much of it depends to me on how things go with those first 4 picks. If 2 defenders get taken ahead of Seattle, then I say the likelihood of trading that 5th spot goes up a lot. If things happen to where all the quarterbacks are taken in the first 4 spots, maybe one defender, then I think it's more likely the Seahawks stay put and take one of their best defensive players that are on the board at number 5.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about this, and I think it's unlikely they trade out of 5 unless they only go down like 2 spots to whoever's at 7, whether that's the Raiders or the
Raiders
Falcons.
are at 7. Yeah,
maybe then, but I think they're pretty psyched to be picking where they're picking. And you've heard Pete talk about it in a couple of his interviews about how they aren't often here and they get to have this opportunity and all that. So I'd be surprised if they trade down much from 5. I think it's almost a lock they trade out of 20, because we've seen them year after year after year with one of those late first round picks. And however you tier out the draft the way that John does, he tends to think that, there's a bunch of guys that are just maybe just a smidgen worse in their draft evaluation. that he could get 2 or 3 of by trading down, as opposed to using that pick towards the tail end of the first round. The drop off isn't quite as big, so he's more apt to trade back. So that would be my guess, is that they hold on to that top 5 pick, or maybe if they do trade back, it'd be very a short distance.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be shocked if they traded out of the first at 20.
With the move that the Bears made, now they have ammunition if they want to trade back into the top 5. They have draft picks that they get from Carolina to where they could make a move like that. And then the Seahawks trading back with the Bears, it's still within the top 10. That's a move that I could see making sense if they're confident that maybe one of their top defenders would still be there at number 9 versus where they're drafting at number 5.
When a lot of guys look at the draft, they do tear it out a little like John does, and especially at the top of the draft. With your conversations with like EJ and some other people even talking, how deep do they seem to think that top tier of players is? Like, is it a 10-person draft? Is it a 7-person draft? Like, how many of those first picks where you're like, yeah, one of those 7 players, 8 players, they're first rounder, top of the draft guy for sure. You got a great chance of them being at least a Pro Bowl.
Based on the conversations I've had, after you get outside the top 10-ish, it's pretty iffy as to where certain spots are going to go. Is it going to be some of the top receivers? Is it going to be even some of the top tight ends? What type of guards are going to go in that range? It gets awfully foggy after about the top 10. But with those 4 quarterbacks, and I don't even know what's going to happen, because I feel like so many people told us that Malik Willis was going to be a top 10 quarterback last year, and then he went in the 3rd round, and Kenny Pickett, slipped outside of the top, top 15 at least. That I wonder how much of that happens with these quarterbacks this year. Like, coming out of the combine, Anthony Richardson has all this hype, but how much of that is hype just based off of athletic performance and ability? And how much does that translate into some of the other issues with his game that you'd have to get over to make him a top 10 player in the draft this year? So I don't know. And so those 4 guys would be CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, Will Levis, Anthony Richardson those seem to be the top 4 quarterbacks. And with talking to EJ, I said, well, go to your 5th one. And he didn't have it like at the ready. So it definitely seems to be 4 top guys. And beyond that, it gets a little bit iffy as to who might be the next guy in terms of the QB class this year.
Yeah, I've started looking at those top 4 guys, and Richardson is interesting because of the way that he tested at the combine. And then you measure that against the play on the tape, and good luck with that one. I mean, this feels like predicting Anthony Richardson feels a lot like the way that I missed on Mahomes when he came out. Super toolsy. You could see it all. You're like, wow, that dude can do a lot of stuff. But catfish, Gabby does a lot of really crappy stuff on the field. Does a bunch of dumb stuff.
Yeah.
And Mahomes ended up in the perfect place possible for him. I think Richardson could be a lot that way. I'm still going back and forth on how I feel about him in particular, but I guarantee you after that combine, one of these teams in that top 4, they're just drooling at the idea of picking up a guy who is that talented with just the physical traits. But I'm not sure that the nuance of quarterback is definitely not something that he excels at right now.
And then watching, you brought up Brett Coleman's video, and he highlighted Dorian Thompson-Robinson from UCLA to the Seahawks as a guy who has some similar athletic traits to Richardson, and a guy who's improved through college as maybe a guy who continues to improve in the NFL. And yeah, you can get him in the 3rd round versus trying to take a swing with that first pick when really what they need is defense. And that's one of the reasons why I liked Coleman's window, because he looked at it from the perspective that I think you and I have been talking about, and that the Super Bowl window really being with Geno at quarterback and trying to build the defense. And I think this gives you that capability. Plus it gives you a quarterback that maybe you can work with, and maybe he comes in and surprises you.
I still haven't looked at the kid from UCLA. I did watch the video. Obviously, I saw the highlights that Brett put up to kind of highlight some of the things that he can do.
Yeah, those are highlights.
Exactly. And of course, they're impressive, and that's great. But what I'm getting with a lot of these guys, really short of Stroud, and I know everybody says Bryce Young's super accurate and all that bullshit. Catfish! Just know there's a lot about, we'll talk about him again in the future, but the rest of these guys, the Richardsons, Hooker, Will Levis, all those guys, it all seems to come back to the Josh Allen conversation of, hey man, these guys, they could do a lot of things. They're big, they're strong, this, that, and the other thing. Yeah, they're inaccurate, but they fixed Josh Allen. So it'll be fine. And there's a big difference.
I remember that conversation too, because you were at the very beginning. You're like, Josh Allen wasn't inaccurate. He was very accurate and had receivers who dropped the passes all the time.
Yeah. And the few times that he was inaccurate, you could easily look at it and be like, oh, he didn't set his feet here. Oh, he was drifting to his left like he does when he misses that throw. Those are all like very specific things that you can look at that are relatively easy to fix, especially from a guy coming from, say, Wyoming, right? Where I can't imagine the QB coaching is the peak of QB coaching. I mean, he's not the Brandon Jordan of quarterback. Yeah. See, I remembered it right there for you.
Well done.
Quarterback whispers out there. But you're right. You looked at the way that Allen was inaccurate and you were like, oh, wait a second. He's really not that inaccurate. There's more factors going on here where you look at, to me, like Will Levis, and all I see is Trey Lance. Maybe a little better in terms of consistency, but big, strong, fast, has a gun, all that stuff, makes some wild throws now and then. And then, boy, just way too often for your liking, that uncorker comes out. It's just, where did that come from? That's the type of inaccuracy. That's the Blake Bortles inaccuracy that you will never fix. So I think it's an interesting conversation to have with a lot of these dudes coming out, and we'll break it down a little further here in the next week or two. We'll see. Teams are they're intoxicated by they fixed Josh Allen. We can fix this next toolsy guy.
Right. Well, and I guess the other guy that I look back at your analysis of would be Justin Herbert, which you saw more of as a check down guy. But as he's coming to the NFL, he has some big throw potential in him. And so, where is he on that spectrum when you compare some of these other guys too?
Yeah. So we brought up the two biggest misses I've had in the 5-6 years that I've been doing the quarterbacks, right? Yeah. Herbert, Mahomes. Those are easily my two biggest misses, and it's not even close. And Mahomes was just wild. Right. Just the chucker's chucker. And I was like, oh God, no. And then Herbert, I was fooled because that Oregon offense is or at least it was then, so freaking god awful to watch that I didn't know how much he could raise his game above that college style game. And I think the NFL has changed enough now. And we're seeing it with one of the Super Bowl quarterbacks from this year with Jalen Hurts, where they go, well, okay, fine. We'll just run a college offense. And right. That's what they do. Now Herbert's more than that for sure. And it was a dead miss, but it was the style offense that got me on him. And I think I got to look more at Hooker, but he might be one of those guys, possibly. I don't know. But those are the two areas that I would think are my biggest blind spots with some of these evaluations is just the toolsy guy who doesn't seem to be able to put it together. I tend to push them down a little more than a more polished guy. Whereas, Herbert, it just looked like he didn't have the processing, and it turned out to be 100% false.
The reason why I bring them up is because I want you to self-scout yourself so you can improve then going into this year, because now it's even more important for the Seahawks to try and identify that future quarterback that they can bring in. And maybe that guy ends up being in the 3rd and 4th round. And shoot, Brock Purdy fell all the way to the last spot and he's okay.
Hey, I liked Purdy in the last draft too.
I know you did.
Yeah.
You slipped by everybody. So
almost
everybody. Well, we want to thank our executive producers, DCH, Brian Shaw, and Rebecca Christensen. If you want to become a member of the flock, you can go to getintheflock.com. Ryan Schobel did it, and he came in at $3 a month. So welcome to the flock to Ryan.
Heck yeah, Ryan. Appreciate it. Anytime that we get these amazing little flockers that come in during the off season, especially the doldrums, and get involved, you guys are basically angels. So congratulations to you. We love you.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody who renewed on their annual subscriptions in March, because I know once we started pushing the annual subscriptions, I think it was in March. And so I was reminded of that as we rolled into this month, that a lot of people re-upped and continued their annual subscriptions. So I don't have all the names, but I want to recognize just everybody who is supporting us annually. And because it makes a huge difference once that rolls around and we get into, me having to mail out prizes and that sort of thing, which I'm going to be starting to do here shortly.
Yeah, big thanks to the annual subscribers right there. I mean, they basically gave us the Geno Smith treatment, right? They were like, yeah, it's a good season last year. We'll re-up you.
And that's always nice, right?
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah. Have a year of guaranteed dollars. That's awesome.
So if you want to do that too, if you ever want to switch over and become an annual contributor, just switch it over up at getintheflock.com. Well, shoot. What do we talk about with not having a pick'em league anymore after this? We don't have any pick'em league to talk about. Nobody sent any. Oh, wait. Did we have an email? Let me see if we have an email.
Okay. Because we may have had one. We covered quite a bit throughout the first half of the show there, Brandon. So, yeah, when you say what else is there to talk about, it gets a little tough because I feel like we've hit most of the hits here.
Yeah, hit on free agency, hit on the draft. Of course, there's going to be more of that to talk about over these next few months, especially leading up to the draft. I'd be able to have EJ on a lot more. I'll probably be looking for Brent, who is a Seahawks fan who covers Alabama football. And so I'm looking forward to getting Brent's perspective on some of those Alabama football players here as we lead up toward the draft. And we'll be looking for your emails, too, to help fill out the show as we head toward draft season. So go Hawks at SeahawkersPodcast.com. Shoot us some emails. We'll talk about what you want to talk about.
Heck yeah, because I'm sure there's some things that we missed or some guys that you're like, what are you talking about? Get out of here, you moron. I know we get at least a few of those in the YouTube comments at the very least.
Yeah, maybe I should be scouring the YouTube comments a little bit more and paying attention to those and then pulling comments out that we can talk about on the show.
I don't know. I mean, some of them don't really need any attention brought to them because they're just nonsense, but it's all right.
Hey, that's what YouTube's for.
Maybe we're not Seahawks fans or other accusations that get thrown around.
Yeah, maybe we thought that we were, were we doubting Geno maybe too much in the early part of the season? Is that one of the...
Oh, I was. Yeah. And then I was wrong.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. And I remember after being wrong, being like, oh, I'm wrong. We should re-sign him pretty early on.
Probably around week 6 or 7.
Shoot, it might have even been before that. Felt like around the Saints game. Was that week 4?
I think where I got it wrong is that, I said that Geno would be the starting quarterback over Drew Lock. But then I thought that Geno would maybe have a game or two where he didn't play well to where they'd give Drew another chance after about 5 weeks in the season. And then that just never happened. And so Geno was just the starter for the rest of the year.
Didn't get injured, played his butt off. Great leader. Man, I am fired up about the Geno extension, though. I really am. That's a guy that's easy to get behind. And the teammate, all his teammates seem to love him.
For sure. Yeah, I am happy for Geno. I'm happy for the deal that they were able to work out because it is so team friendly. I mean, shoot, let's talk about that some more. The Geno contract, when you compare it with the other 2 quarterbacks that signed contracts this past week, you have Derek Carr going to the Saints, and then you have Daniel Jones re-signing with the New York Giants. When you compare Geno Smith's contract up against those 2, how do you not pick the Seahawks as the winner of the quarterback signing competition this offseason within the last week?
How on God's green earth did the New York Giants give Danny Dimes that contract? Who were they bidding against, by the way? That's what I'd like to know.
Why were they bidding against the franchise tag? I guess they wanted to use that on Saquon, which, okay. I just, that was baffling to me why they would go ahead and give that size deal to Daniel Jones. But talking to Joe DeLeon these past few weeks, when I asked him as a Giants fan to compare the Giants situation to the Seahawks situation with Geno Smith, his argument was that we saw the peak of Geno Smith, which I suppose if that's your argument, I could see why you would think that. But I tend to think that maybe we saw the peak of Daniel Jones.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And the peak of Daniel Jones is a check down Charlie who can run around a little bit. And that's about it. And 40 mil a year, 45 mil a year, whatever it is that it came in at, that's absurd. I would be apoplectic if I was a New York Giants fan. That would be one of those deals that I would be just so frustrated, especially now that you have a new regime, right? New GM, Dable is the coach. You're like, we're going to start to do different business a little differently here. And you go out and you give Daniel Jones that contract. Daniel Jones, who is he better than Andy Dalton right now? I don't think he is.
Yeah, I mean, you're counting on him showing a lot more improvement from this next season. And yeah, he's still young. He's 26, but yeah, cap hit of $20 million the first year. And then it jumps up to $45 million in year 2, $40 million in year 3. And then there's a potential out after 3 years with a dead cap of $9 million. But that's a contract that could kind of cripple the organization if he doesn't work out. And that's the exact opposite of right. And that's the exact opposite of what the Seahawks got with Geno. If Geno turns out like if he had this one great year where he was comeback player of the year and then he falls back into being a below average quarterback, it doesn't hurt the franchise at all.
Just a year. The Seahawks deal is so much better than that Giants deal. You can't tell me that they wouldn't have been better off with Jimmy G or like a Mike White type or somebody like that. I think they would be. I think they'd be a better team. And if you're going to give a questionable contract to one of those stars, quote unquote, I would be much more apt to give it to Saquon, even with the injury history, because if he is healthy, he's a hell of a player. Daniel Jones, when he's healthy, is below meh.
Yeah.
15 touchdowns last year.
Yeah, he's a guy that he led them to the playoffs, you could say, in a way.
He was around as they went to the playoffs. You're correct.
And a really good running quarterback. If you're the Giants, man, trade for Lamar.
Sure. Why not? Unless he really does want that super massive guaranteed deal. Because I don't think I can give somebody with that style of a play that kind of contract, which is exactly why he wants that kind of contract. So I get it.
I can't believe anything in the media about Lamar Jackson this offseason because of the fact that he doesn't have an agent. All of the agents throw out all this kind of garbage to the media. We've seen it with so many other players who haven't had agents, whether it's Bobby Wagner, Richard Sherman. They get these offseason narratives, and it's just amplified because it's a quarterback versus defensive players or on the offensive line.
Holy smokes. How much does the other agents hate this whole, I'm not giving you your 7% cut or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Which is, it's a crap ton. Whatever it is, it's a crap ton.
Because Lamar is getting dragged in the media.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's not just by the agents. The GMs come out and they drag him.
Yeah.
Like, because they hate it. Man, John Schneider hates it when somebody represents himself. He really does. And you heard, like, just think about how much John talked about the agent for Geno throughout that presser. I think his name's Chaffee or something like that.
Oh, it was so great. It was so great. The relationship was so good. Yeah, the agent's name got thrown out there a lot. I don't remember his name because it wasn't Brandon Jordan. But he got, whoever his agent did, got some run in that press conference.
Got a lot of run in that press conference. GMs do not want this. They do not want to deal with the player directly. And I do understand the thought process behind that in terms of cooler heads and, all that stuff and truths having to be said. But yeah, it's a war on Lamar Jackson right now from the outside. And the thing is the one thing I have a lot of respect for Lamar in all of this. How much have you heard come out of his camp?
Yeah. He's not negotiating through the media.
He's not saying jack.
Yeah.
which leads me to believe that he's probably doing a decent job of representing himself with the interests that he has and the things that he wants to see happen.
From the Ravens' perspective, I can see that making a ton of sense for them, though, is that they don't have to give out a ton of guaranteed money for a quarterback that plays a really physical style.
The Lamar deal is one of the most unique deals that is coming up here either this year or in the past couple years in just terms of his style of a play, his level of play, his injury history, and how the league kind of looks going forward. I think the Ravens have played this pretty well in terms of, I think I would have done the exact same thing and used the franchise tag that they did to allow Lamar to negotiate, because this whole time, I'm sure between Lamar and his mom and the front office and everybody that are in the discussions, they both have an idea of what the value is. And obviously they haven't gotten close. So at that point, okay, let's let the market speak. Go ahead. Let us know. And I don't think it's going to be as high as Lamar thought it was going to be. I think teams are really starting to reel back on this QB thing a little bit. I think it's going to help the Ravens when it comes time to actually getting the deal done, because I do think that they'll come to at least a short-term deal before the start of the season.
It's tough because when you talk about the market really only is there when it's free agency. In this situation, there's going to be a team that, if they sign Lamar to a market deal, they're going to have to give up draft picks to the Ravens, which I think maybe the Ravens are okay with when it comes to, because that's what you're saying when you give the non-exclusive versus the exclusive franchise tag, is that you're saying, okay, well, it's okay for other teams to negotiate, because then you either sign your quarterback then to the deal that was just negotiated, or you get 2 first-round picks. Because that's a pretty terrible thing to do as an organization, then, to let some other team negotiate your deal and then say, oh, well, we'll take that. I don't think we've ever seen that, have we?
I think in most cases that would be correct. I do think this is so unique in terms of his talent and the way that he plays and the injury risk that's associated with it. Because I guarantee you Lamar's not coming off of a massive amount of guarantee in, somewhere in that 55 to 60 million a year range.
You have to make more than Daniel Jones.
Well, for sure. Yeah. For sure.
And he got a pretty big deal.
Yeah, he did. Now, the question is, with the Ravens, I don't see another team that's going to pony up with a massive deal like that. If you kind of go through and think about the super quarterback needy teams, there's really not as many right now as there traditionally has been over the last 10 years or so. Most teams are kind of set with a guy that they feel good about.
And they have to have the picks to give up to do it. I don't know. And you also have to have the cash to be able to do it, because the one team that immediately came to mind was the Raiders. And they generally don't have the cash to make big splashes when it comes to free agent signings. So I kind of like that pairing of the Raiders and Lamar, though.
It would be interesting. I don't like it for Lamar.
Well, maybe not, but yeah, I don't know
Some
where else.
Some people have talked Miami. They don't have the first rounder, but maybe they could do some trades or something like that to get into it.
Right.
It just seems like it seems like you're ramsing it a little bit at that point.
It doesn't necessarily have to be 2 first-round picks, because the teams can negotiate under the franchise tag for compensation. So I think that it doesn't have to be.
I didn't know that. I thought for sure it had to be like the 2, and then you go from there. But if there's other ways you can do that.
We've never seen it with a quarterback of Lamar's stature. So that's why I hedge on it a little bit. But we've seen guys traded under the franchise tag for less than those 2 first-rounders.
It's going to be fascinating to see. It really is. This is one of my favorite storylines of the offseason, just because of all the intricacies of it. So good luck to Lamar, and I wish him the best. He's earned it, man.
What do you say we get on to some do better and better at life?
All right, man. My do better this week is for the catfishing Arizona Cardinals, because they're screwing things up for us again right now, sitting at number 3. They haven't traded out yet. I've been waiting for them to make the big mistake here, but there's a new regime in town. Like, I'm just waiting for them to do Cardinals things here. And I want them to trade out of that spot so that we have a little more certainty with what's going to happen for us. Because I have no idea what the Cardinals are going to do right now. None. They might not even at this point. I don't know. See, back in the day, I could count on Steve Keim doing something really freaking dumb, doing something that would set their franchise back another 5 years. But no, now I don't have that certainty anymore. Now they're the only team in front of us in the draft order that I can't have some certainty about what they're going to do. And for that, hurry up and trade out of 3, Cardinals. I'm sick of waiting. Do better.
Well, maybe now that the Bears have made that move, now the Cardinals can make their move, because I've seen a few mock drafts at least that have the Raiders moving up into that 3rd spot, which would then put the Cardinals in the 7th spot. It turns out one of these mock drafts even has Tyree Wilson, the one that Brett Coleman mocked the Seahawks, then going to Arizona at the 7th spot. So it introduces some tension, just because I think we're looking at similar positions as the Cardinals. Well, they could use just about anything.
That's great, because the Cardinals need everything.
That's true. Yeah. They could probably take safety or corner, or, you know what? I actually, if they move back to 7, I kind of like cornerback for them, taking one of the top corners inside the top 10. That would make sense for them.
That sounds great. Actually, I would rather they pick a wide receiver that looks like they might need a little bit of development in,
right.
For the next 3 to 5 years. That'd be great. Do that with your top 10 pick.
Whatever is a high bust-worthy position, I would like the Cardinals to go after that position.
That sounds great. Sounds great. But this will be our first litmus test for the new coach from the Eagles there. And I don't even know who the GM is.
Oh, I don't know, but they still have the same owner. So I'm counting on the dysfunction really starting at the top with ownership in Arizona and trickling on down. And now that may allow them a 1-year grace period where they don't have a lot of influence from ownership in this draft, but it'll kick in eventually.
So you're a big believer in trickle down dysfunction?
Yes.
I'm with you on this in this instance. You bet.
Might do better this week is for DoorDash. Have you ever used DoorDash? I know that you're kind of up in the mountains, but maybe when you're on the road, you use it a little bit.
Yeah, on the road. And I don't know which way you're going to go with this, but I could see where some frustration might creep in at certain points here.
I don't use it a lot because I live relatively close to everything. And so I just would go to the place where I'm picking up food from. It was snowing pretty hard last night. And I was thinking, oh, you know what? This place is offering free delivery online. I'll take it. And then they'll bring me the food, and I don't have to pay for delivery for one, and I don't have to drive out in the snow. So put in an order about 5:00, and I get an email about 20 minutes later. Hey, your food's going to be there in about 15 minutes. Oh, great. This is working out fine. 20 minutes later go by after the original scheduled time. Nothing. Haven't heard anything. So I'm like, okay, well, who do I call? Because the text says it's coming through DoorDash, but I put in the order through the restaurant's website. So do I text whoever the number is I didn't know. So I call the restaurant, and they're like, oh yeah, well, the DoorDash kind of handles that. So then I call the driver, and he's like, oh yeah, I got stuck in the snow, but I'm just now getting here. And I'm like, well, look, I live 5 minutes away. I can do it. Just tell me if you're there. And he's like, oh no, yeah, I'm here, and I'll be right there. Okay. Another 15 minutes goes by. Haven't heard anything. I'm literally 5 minutes from the establishment. So there's no way that it should take 15 minutes. So I call the restaurant. Hey, any idea if my food's been picked up or what's going on here? And it turned out, no, my food hadn't been picked up. So they're like, well, since it's been 45 minutes, we'll remake it. And I'm like, okay, I'll be there. I'm going to come pick it up. And 10 minutes later, I have another DoorDash thing that another driver has been assigned. And And so I called this other dude. He's like, hey, I'm here to pick up your food. I'm like, oh, hey, so was the other guy who I talked to a half hour ago. I'm just going to come get it. And so it was a really frustrating experience with DoorDash. And so for the one time that I tried to use it, I probably won't be using it again. DoorDash. Hey, and maybe just the driver. If you get stuck, let the people know that you can't make it to the place because maybe the person who wants the food only lives 5 minutes away. Do better.
Well, for sure, you need to admit when maybe you're a little screwed if you're the other driver, if you've buried it in a snowbank. But some of this is on you, Brandon, because you pushed off the responsibility of driving around in inclement weather onto some poor guy just trying to make a living, dashing to your door.
Yeah.
And I
had a tip plugged in there exactly for it, not even knowing when my food would actually get here. The tip was pre-plugged in.
Gotcha. Okay. So you had taken into account the difficulty of driving around with the other idiots out on the road when it's snowing heavily.
Yeah. Just tell me you're having a problem getting to where you need to go. That's all I need to know.
See, my biggest problem with the DoorDash has never been that. That's a much worse experience than I've ever had with it. But usually when I'm ordering, though, too, like I'm in a bigger city when I'm out traveling for work, right?
Yeah.
But the biggest one that I've had is finally get through all your order and everything, because it's different for every restaurant. You've never ordered from there before. All that. I don't know how many times we've done that after being done at the Sawmill. Get our order placed in, and we missed the cutoff by 5 minutes. This delivery ended 10 minutes ago. Now you got to find another place and then put it all in again, and then you miss it again. That's been my biggest problem, which I don't even know if it's a DoorDash problem. That might be more each individual restaurant for cutting off delivery too early. It'd be early too, like 7, 8 o'clock. You'd be like, what the hell?
What do you mean you aren't delivering after 7 o'clock?
Yeah.
Nonsense. All right. On to Better at Life. I'm going to kick things off with Better at Life this week and give mine to the late Bud Grant, who passed away this past weekend. One of Pete Carroll's mentors, brought Pete Carroll under his wing coaching in Minnesota because Pete was the defensive backs coach for Bud Grant with the Vikings. And Bud passes away at the age of 95. And I'll always remember Bud Grant, not for his time coaching, because really that was really before my time in football, but in that playoff game where it was like one of the coldest or top 5 coldest games in playoff history, Bud Grant coming out to midfield in his short sleeves in that playoff game between the Seattle Seahawks and the Minnesota Vikings. And yeah, there was 90-year-old Bud Grant just walking out there in his short sleeves and being a badass in general. And so to Bud Grant, you better at life than Skip Bayless.
I like it. One of the guys that has had an amazing, huge influence on the NFL with his coaching tree and philosophy and all of that. You can put him in the Bill Walsh, Belichick, Parcells, just the guys who really knew how to get it done. So yeah, pretty sad to hear that he passed by, but a nice long life for him. And I'm sure it affected Pete Carroll greatly, because I know he's one of his biggest mentors and all of that. So best wishes to the Grant family and all Vikings fans. Bud Grant was a keeper.
Inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1994. So yeah, his contribution was recognized quite a while ago.
Perfect.
All right. Better at Life. Who you got?
Who I got? I got our GM, Brandon, John Schneider. That's my Better at Life this week, because I can't believe that he pulled off something that no GM has really been able to pull off over the last 10, 15 years. And that's get a potentially top 10 guy, but more of a middle tier quarterback in at a middle tier price. He did it. That just has been unheard of. And it's been one of the things that drove me the most nuts about the quarterback market over the past 10, like, why would you pay Dak Prescott that much money? Basically, Geno plays at Dak level for now at about half the money.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I think this is one of the biggest deals that is going to help reestablish the quarterback market to the point to where it should be over the next 5 years. This is going to be a deal that a lot of GMs point to. I think it's just a fantastic job. I love it all the way around. John Schneider is a freaking genius, and I love that he's our GM, and he is better at life than Skip Bayless.
That's a good point, because I could see a lot of these mid-tier quarterbacks. I mean, Derek Carr is off the board because he went ahead of Geno, but a lot of these other guys saying, yeah, give me the Geno style deal to where it's not going to really hurt the team financially, but the players still get rewarded if they end up starting and being very successful. Because I think we see it way too many times with running backs being on their rookie deals. You see them in their best years giving teams so much, you can have a lot of success with a second round, third round running back who's getting paid almost nothing. And then they get around to their free agency year, like we're seeing with, Tony Pollard got the franchise tag for the Cowboys, or Josh Jacobs. Did he get tagged by the Raiders? I know his salary wasn't super high either, but you're looking at like a $10 million deal, and running backs, they have the ability to really impact the team. Yet when they get to their free agency years, it's the years that they start to become less productive. And so they don't have the types of paydays. And the reason why I correlate those two is because quarterbacks that are kind of in the middle tier, they function similarly in that they can provide a lot of value for a team, and they should be rewarded if they do well.
Absolutely. And I love that the Seahawks are taking a different approach to team building, because you've been told now for the last however many years, you either have to have Mahomes, Herbert, Allen, one of the top 4 to 5 guys, or you've got to have a dude on a rookie deal. And that's it. And that's all. That's the only 2 ways you can win a Super Bowl with a quarterback. That is it. And I never believe that to be true. I think that there is definitely at least a couple other avenues, and I think this is one of them. And John Schneider and Pete Carroll, they've had the balls to go out there and do this, and they got it done with Geno. I love it. It's just so everything I would like to do if I was a GM, right? Like, these are the precedences that I would like to try to set if I were making deals, and I'm just a huge fan.
The thing that would make me a bigger fan of it is if Geno Smith takes us to the Super Bowl and wins the Super Bowl.
Heck yeah, man. Keep getting them checks, Geno. I want him to get every one of those incentives, because that means we've had an awesome year.
And I think with that,
there's only one thing left to say.
Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.